Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 30 transfer plans. I wanted to use this video to just talk about how I feel about my team, how we should generally be approaching transfers, and to give a little bit of information in terms of when you're going to get these pockets of information when it comes to blank game weeks and double game weeks. So to start off with the video, let's just look at my team. We got 62 points, so it was a very, very small red. I think I went from 5.4 thousand in the world to around 5,700. So still technically a 6K rank. Did I lose a point from going into Virgil? I did, because that's what you should expect. Virgil conceding 2 goals to Wolves, but it did happen. I was late on Virgil, also early on Virgil, and now suffering from Virgil as an owner. But it's nice to have triple Arsenal defense, so that's really paid off. And I think having Everton at home, fingers crossed, will be another great game on paper for the kind of players that we've managed to keep in this situation, especially with Timber, who I think has massively redeemed himself as a transfer, especially competing against, let's say, Rice, for example, in double game week 28 or 26 rather. In the midfield, I clearly went a little bit lighter in this position because we went for Wilson. He's been injured as of late. Anderson has also been injured as of late, which is part of the reason why I went for the Virgil move. I kind of wanted to have 3 good defenders, and I knew Richards would be fairly solid because Tottenham just were so poor, and that's why we targeted Harry Wilson the week prior. But I ultimately just wanted a little bit of security with Virgil, a bit more anyways, and didn't work out. But Virgil still has Tottenham at home, which is a huge positive, and he still plays for blank game week 31. So after making this transfer, in theory, I don't really need to make a transfer this week or even next week to have a full 11 for blank game week 31. So right now I've got Virgil, I've got Dubravka, I've got Maguire and Anderson in terms of defense. Now, if Anderson continues to stay on the bench, which I'm not sure if that's going to continue happening, but that obviously will be a problem for me and that will kind of necessitate a transfer, but more so for a game week 31 perspective because I'm going to be benching him this week. With the midfield, Enzo actually has a pretty good game here with Newcastle at home. Lefay's actually been really consistent too, but he has a pretty poor fixture in game week 31. So there is capacity and potential to maybe actually go for and seek a quite ambitious move for Marcus Tavernier. Do I really want to do that ahead of a wildcard 32? Possibly not, because I think some of the information that we can gain or the pockets of information that we can gain over the next 2 weeks could be quite crucial. Bruno and Sobo, I still think very much constants in FPL, so very happy to continue owning them. Ekitike, bit of that sort of yo-yo with him. I mean, João Pedro has been absolutely lights ahead of all the other forwards. Maybe Brentford have had better fixtures, same with Liverpool, but yeah, I mean, fair play to João Pedro. 2.68 XG, non-pen as well, versus Aston Villa is extremely impressive. They're possibly also another team to target at this moment in time, just because they've just looked really, really poor. I mean, look at the chances they've also conceded to a Wolves team who we've always criticized as being a poor attack, but not necessarily a poor defense this season. And they actually got lots of chances versus Villa as well. So that's kind of the sort of team strength shift as well that I think we're starting to realize. The teams that we're targeting is starting to change a little bit. Like you're focusing a little bit more on Tottenham, potentially, loosening up on how strong you think a Newcastle is or how strong you think a Villa is as well. I know Newcastle just got a great result versus Man United, but still for the most part, away from home, they've been a fairly mediocre team, I think, this season for their own standards. Not against the standards that, we set as a Champions League team, let's just say. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much, unfortunately, the lay of the land. I think having a soft red is okay. Moving from 6K to 6K, I'm okay with. Captaincy, we probably called it wrong, but I think we got the minutes right. And that's part of the reason why I didn't go for my -4 sort of suggested transfer to Salah, because I don't think Pep really gave any comments that were indicative that Haaland would most likely be out for the medium term. We tend to see managers talk about injuries, and I think when someone's actually out for a prolonged amount of time, so a couple of weeks, for example, I do feel like they're a little bit more honest, whereas, of course, they're a bit more vague when you don't really know whether they're coming back the next game or the game, right now, like the impending game. So I felt like Haaland seemed like he was going to be in a position to start. Felt the same about Wilson too and Anderson. I was wrong about Anderson. Wilson was a start or 0, which ended up being the case. So don't feel too bad about the decisions in terms of even like the starting players and the benching players. As far as my team this week, in terms of what team I'm planning to pick if I roll, it's going to be triple Arsenal defense, Virgil as well. Maguire's is on the bench, but I think there's a pretty big dilemma here where, in theory, I guess if I'm backing Bruno captaincy, I've got even more incentive to also back the United clean sheet. just marginally. I know that that's a very soft impact, but that could make me want to kind of put a little bit of homogeneity in terms of outcomes there with Maguire in the team potentially. I think Wilson, Lafay, and Maguire is quite close because with Wilson, you don't know exactly how many minutes he's going to play. With Lafay, I think guaranteed minutes, but what's the ceiling on this type of player? With Maguire, I've gotten nothing from him so far, but if we also have declining outlook in terms of, let's say, Aston Villa as a side, then why not also chance Maguire maybe being able to get a clean sheet versus Aston Villa, if even Wolves can get a clean sheet versus Aston Villa. And United, for the most part, have been a pretty good defense. As far as the front line, I'm pretty happy with that. I think looking back at my transfer options 2 weeks ago when I used my 2 free transfers to go to Wilson and Thiago, I'm still very much happy that those were the transfers that I pursued. Sure, I've lost out on Palmer and keeping him, who I think is going to be a massive differential versus Newcastle versus even Everton away. But I think there's some validity in terms of Enzo Lefebvre was always a much more solid option than, let's say, keeping Junior Krupi into the team because Krupi's minutes were always very fragile, whereas Lefebvre has actually proven to be a really solid pick. Hence why I think I'm happy that I got the auto sub from him from the 5-pointer. Now, he didn't do an Elliot Anderson in terms of 12 points or Senesi or Hill with 11 and 8, but he's still a very solid pick, and auto sub jam happens to everyone eventually. We just didn't get the best rub of the green this week compared to some other peers, and so that's fine. But I think Enzo Lefebvre at least gives you the guarantee every week with the minutes that he plays compared to Junior Krupi, who doesn't, and that's why kind of making that Thiago move has worked. And also, fortunately, Haaland coming back. Now, hopefully that just means he's also available for West Ham, but I feel like captaincy-wise, I'm most likely going to be calling upon Bruno or Ekitike. Ekitike with the Tottenham team strength piece, and Bruno just because he's just that solid as a pick, right? He's not, for example, competing in Europe. He's probably the player that I just trust the most, generally speaking, like in FPL at this moment in time. So that's how I feel about my team. Nothing too particular, but in terms of sort of reevaluating it and evaluating the previous game week that we just had, I think Bournemouth actually were completely all over Brentford in this match in the 0-0. So I think actually anyone looking at this Bournemouth team should continue to be very impressed by their results, and actually also their defense at home. With Everton, it's one of the classic Everton performances where you can see obviously Everton have some very weird results away from home, at home, but when they play versus one of the worst teams in the league, they are an absolute tank and so robust. And we got that Tarko goal finally, which he was always going to be due because as a center back, you're always going to get a chance eventually, even if set pieces aren't aimed directly at you and whatnot. Leeds and Sunderland, I think it was a very close game in terms of fine margins and VAR. So I don't really want to step into it too much. I think, yes, of course, nice that Sunderland got a goal, but I think looking at this result as if Sunderland were much better than Leeds probably is the wrong takeaway there, but still an impressive result by Sunderland. I think Leeds, for the most part, even though they haven't been scoring as of late, have been an impressive team even on attack. So I really wouldn't be worried, for example, if I was someone who bought DCL. I mean, you were very close as well, even towards a penalty within that match, and I don't think you should be upset in terms of like how DCL looks as a pick. With Wolves versus Liverpool, there were mistakes from Liverpool in that game, but they were very ineffectual as well outside of set pieces. And yes, of course, Salah did score an open play goal, but that was kind of a gift, as we all know. I just generally think that I wouldn't be too worried at this moment in time in terms of if I was owning Liverpool picks, they still have Tottenham at home. They seem to have really good results consistently versus Brighton, at least very sort of end-to-end type games. And yeah, I mean, compared to some of the other teams, it's still a perfectly fine hold. Have they been amazing, exhilarating even? Like, no, not even close. Chelsea had a very impressive result. It's an interesting piece here because, of course, we have seen Chelsea as of late, and I don't think it's like they've racked up such a good attacking performance until they played versus Aston Villa. So, they played versus teams like Burnley, they played versus teams like Wolves. If you look at the non-pen data, I mean, the chances that they've gotten were nowhere near, for example, the level of chances that they got versus Aston Villa. So I think, yes, of course, João Pedro's extremely impressive, and he's continued to back that up. And fair enough, I've probably got that wrong. But I also think, maybe this is a bit of an aberration in terms of our Aston Villa in a really, really bad moment at this moment in time. And that's kind of why Chelsea were able to find it so easy. Not quite sure. With Brighton versus Arsenal, I think a lot of people have actually put comments on this game, including Fabian Hurstler himself. He's probably right. But ultimately, that's what Arsenal do or have tried to do this season. And I mean, I think their performance improved massively when Havertz came on the pitch. I think we'll be seeing a little bit more of Havertz this season, especially over the Champions League games. But their defense is still something that you can very much rely upon. And of course, it was a massive DEFCON performance from Timber and Gabriel, and I don't think you'll see that too often. But it's nice to know that this Arsenal team can sort of dig deep for a result like that. And with West Ham, I'm actually quite happy that I didn't downgrade Somerville on the cheat sheet. I felt like he could still be a very solid pick because the underlyings for this West Ham team from an attacking point of view, even defensively as well, of course, a lot of people making comments about, West Ham pre and post Disasi. But yeah, I felt very confident about West Ham and the strength of their team as of late. And it goes back to, for example, when we're targeting teams, even at this stage of the season, our expectations can change. My valuation, for example, West Ham continues to go up. My valuation on a team like Tottenham or Aston Villa continues to go down. And City versus Forest, I think that the main problem here is City always can find a way, despite the XGC numbers being quite good. They're not at the level of Arsenal, so that's something important to mention at the outset. They didn't have Nico O'Reilly, who I think is transformational for this team in the midfield compared to, let's say, Foden. And then they still just give their opponents a few too many shots within their matches. And that's the kind of outcome that you kind of open yourself to as a Man City. Yeah. Newcastle versus Man United. I actually missed this game, but I mean, I've looked at the VAR call as well. I don't really want to talk too much about it. I think Newcastle, as ever, have always been so impressive at home. But that doesn't really change my expectation in terms of a Newcastle or United for what they've put out this season on a game-to-game basis. And then with Spurs and Crystal Palace, yeah, I mean, there's not much to be said here. We've been talking about targeting Spurs. That has not changed. It is what it is. And that's pretty much my thoughts in terms of this game week and in terms of team strengths. I do think when I look back at my own team, there is scope and there's potential for me, especially if there's a bit more doubt around Wilson, to just simply move Enzo Lefebvre to Tavernier. We'll talk about that within my transfer plans. But the wider aspect in terms of the chip strategy piece is you're going to have all these FA Cup games coming after Game Week 29, and you will find out who's progressing to the next round of the FA Cup soon. But the actual time when you actually find out when these blanks and doubles are going to happen in terms of blank Game Week 34 and double Game Week 33 is actually in the midweek of Game Week 31 technically. So after Game Week 31, before Game Week 32 happens, between this time here of 22 of March and 10 of April, you will get the information on which teams are blanking and doubling. Hence why everyone's still loosely planning for a wildcard 32 strategy. Now, this could still change, right? You could maybe choose to prolong your wildcard. Now, I probably won't do that if I'm being honest. I think I'll wildcard 32, but you will get the information before the Game Week 32 deadline, which means that you can already start to make moves from a wildcard perspective if you're locking in the wildcard in 32. But I know some people like to be a little bit more rigorous with their planning. People like to open themselves up to more different ideas. And I think there are opportunities to do an even later wildcard than this, such as a wildcard 34 or a wildcard 35. And you can also pursue, for example, I wouldn't really do this, but maybe even like, let's say, a free hit 31 strategy if, let's say, City do get a blank. And of course, I think the big thing as we head towards Game Week 30 is that we should most likely get information on the blank Game Week in 31. Like, the City and Newcastle result would have happened, and whether the game goes ahead in terms of whether that City versus Newcastle game is going to go ahead in Game Week 31 is basically to be seen, right? So if Newcastle actually do beat City in the FA Cup, we could still see the City game reinstated in Game Week 31, which you cannot see currently on the schedule. But that is not 100% predicated by the FA Cup result. It just opens the possibility for it to be reinstated, right? So even if Newcastle to win at St. James Park, when they actually play versus Man City, you could still have a blank Game Week 31. It just comes down to the Premier League and what they tend to do in terms of decisions. They have in the past, for example, reversed decisions like this, and you will still see a game like Man City maybe come back into the schedule. And so it is worth waiting for that information before you actually make moves around this, Saturday, 14th of March deadline for Game Week 30, right? Because you're going to get the information for Game Week 31 by then, and everything should be good. So that's just something I wanted to mention. I myself will not be making transfers up until then. I'll maybe make a transfer on the deadline, but it's a bit unlikely. And I think for most people, this is an opportunity if you are already set for blank Game Week 31 to start rolling your free transfers so that you get the information drop around Game Week 32 and you have the best wildcard possible. And now we switch gears towards my transfer plans. We're in Game Week 30. As I said, I've got two kind of paths open to me. And actually, it's interesting, of course, that The FFH model actually does recommend playing Maguire over Lafay, over Anderson, even over Wilson. And part of that, as I said, is because this is probably assuming that Wilson has an injury. So you can see Wilson's expected points are almost artificially low for this game week here because the expected points must be very, very low as well. So something to think about there where maybe, as I said, I do want to play Maguire, but it's also close to Lafay and it's quite close to Anderson. I just think I would rather back Maguire if I'm not going to play Wilson anyways, as opposed to back Anderson over Maguire. So this is already a very good team for this game week, but how could we make it better? Let's just assume that I roll here, right? Just for once, FPL Fran could actually roll a transfer, so let's just assume that we do. The team next week would actually look like this, and I think you have an opportunity to roll once again. So to improve this team, I think I've got an opportunity of maybe moving Enzo towards, let's say, an Anthony Gordon. You can't see him right now, but I think I can just put Gordon's name in there in the hat for the Sunderland home game. That could be a possibility. I can also my wildcard's already locked in from the previous week when we actually set up our transfer plan, but Gordon is certainly an option as well in the midfield. Other picks that I can kind of access would be maybe a Mateus Cunha, as you can see as well, but I think still Bournemouth away. Gordon's probably the best isolated pick in terms of a replacement for Enzo. That still leaves me with actually having Enzo Lafay, and I think just for a 0.3 expected point gain, it's pretty mediocre to do this, so I don't really want to do that. However, that's basically it in terms of transfers, right? Game week 32, if I can head towards the wild card with 2 free transfers, I think that's probably a happy medium for myself as a pretty aggressive manager who likes to use his transfers because I could set up the bench boost and there can still be issues, and I could still want to alleviate those issues or make more powerful moves coming out of, let's say, the double game week and the blank. And maybe it's things like yo-yoing between Holland to other premium picks. And I think having more money in the bank is also another form of flexibility, right? Or having money in general. Because for a lot of managers where, let's say, they have less team value, I think that there is an element of you have less flexibility, even though you have more free transfers, because to move between big players like Palmer and Salah with less team value is much more difficult, right? You kind of have to tweak things with your defense to maybe to let's say accommodate for affording things in the midfield. But for myself, I think since I can generally afford to, let's say, have a little bit more of weaker defense, let's say, to accommodate for stronger kind of front lines and midfields. And there's not much value difference, in my opinion, between some of the cheaper defenders. Like right now, one of the best defenders in the game, if you assume that there were no blanks and doubles, is Nico O'Reilly. He's only 5 point something million. He's not at 6 million, and we own the Arsenal defenders already, but that can change, right? When you approach the double, you might go triple Arsenal defense. You might go maybe Saka and Rice. And there's a lot of options around that. So something to think about. But at this moment in time, I think I'm most likely going to roll and then wildcard in 32. Now, if I was to sort of reset this plan and, as I said, be a bit more ambitious, I do think there's value to be gained if maybe I just make a Tavernier type move. So if I go for Marcus Tavernier here, I think the advantage is obviously he's much better than Maguire. So that's a 0.9 expected point gain here. It could even be better. I think maybe if, let's say, I don't know if the model's Tavernier minutes are perfect, but it is Burnley away. He's a set piece taker. He's a penalty taker. I think he's probably actually the best midfielder that I have outside of Bruno in this case. And then in game week 31, once again, he's a bit better than the sort of Knicks available pick. Because if you guys remind yourselves of what Enzo Lafay was producing in terms of expected points, it was around 3.7. So there's a 0.6 expected point gain here. Much better than in the case of me just simply replacing Enzo for Gordon. And of course, there might be some gain in, let's say, just replacing Maguire. So if I was to kind of replace the path or redo the path, I could optimize my team to give me 30. And then on 31, I could maybe also just replace Timber with a Newcastle defender. This is something we've talked about where, okay, this is suddenly a perceived 2.3 point gain on Maguire, which is a lot more than actually the net accumulated gain of Tavernier versus the other two picks. But it just comes down to, do I think Tavernier is maybe a little bit lower rated on the models, and maybe do I prefer him a bit more? Or equally, do I think Chow is a little bit overrated, or Chow is a bit overrated here in this case, and maybe I prefer actually having Tavernier over 2 weeks as opposed to Chow for just 1 week versus when I already have a mirror matchup as well, right? Where, for example, I've got Chow versus Enzo Lafay in this case. So just something to think about in terms of transfers, but that's pretty much all I have left to do. I don't think I don't need to kind of have the best team possible for Gaming 31. This is not something that I'm really looking at. So it is very much plausible that I just go towards Gaming 31 with 2 free transfers and I just relax a bit. For Gaming 32, I have the wild card. For blank Gaming 34, I'll have the free hit. And then suddenly we can play the rest of the season with a couple transfers and we can try to hopefully end the season on a high. What I'm looking forward most to, of course, is just getting the wild card, doing the wild card video, and getting as much action as possible with the chips, because that's one of my favorite parts of FPL, planning a wild card, being meticulous with that, and absolutely squeezing the maximum out of my budget. So that's what I'm looking forward to myself. If you kind of look at my team, I think from a Gameweek 32 perspective, I probably have a worse team than most people. I suppose the positive is that if I keep triple Arsenal defense all the way throughout here, this actually ends up looking like a pretty good team. But I feel like other people might be in a better position. So let's say if you've done the move from Haaland to Salah, it's very plausible that you have a better team in Gaming 32 than other managers, and therefore you could pursue maybe a little bit of a different wildcard strategy. So let's say if you've gone for Salah already, you could very much actually have a free hit perfect team on Gaming 32. And that's something to think about as a manager, where maybe that's better. In this case here, actually, when I look at my team, fine, I have a great defense, but yeah, Enzo Lefebvre versus Man City at home. Sure, he's got 4.8 expected points, but do I really love that? Do I love Haaland versus Chelsea away? Is it a worse team than other managers? Possibly. But it could also be close to the team that I kind of wildcard into. So I can't criticize this team too much, but it's just an idea in terms of, as I said, if you guys are a Salah owner, you might be in a nice spot to actually consider just doing a Gaming 32 chill, and then a wild card in a different later sort of gaming strategy, because some people are pursuing something like this, right? For example, for people who've actually already used their free hit, they might be pursuing a little bit of a later wild card so that they can kind of, I guess, manage the double game week and then just quickly wild card into a team that fits with the blank game week in 34, something like that. So just a thought. But that's pretty much my transfer plans for now. As I said, I am not that keen on making a Tavernier move. It's probably preferred to, let's say, Chow in 32 or 31. But I want to wait for results. I do want to see if FA Cup outcomes happen. And of course, we can react on, let's say, if Man City actually, and this is an interesting scenario, if let's say we actually get confirmation that the blank gaming 31 is not going to happen for Man City, I could just simply also just make a move, which would be as simple as going Enzo to Semenyo, right? That could be a move that I actually make as well. So it is something that I have considered. It is something that is extremely tight for me in terms of budget. Semenyo's just risen though, so I don't think that I will be like enabled to make this move. But West Ham away, Crystal Palace at home is a back-to-back fixture. That looks pretty good. The only thing is, I'm not really sure if that's realistic. So we'll see what happens, but I think that could be an option for me, because if I just make this as a transfer and then he actually does play Crystal Palace at home, then of course my team looks pretty good here, because even Enzo Lefebvre would get replaced in Gaming 31. So that's kind of like the interesting case scenario where I get to round off my team in quite a nice way for Gaming 31 and 30. But we'll see what happens, and we'll let the FA Cup results dictate themselves, and then hopefully we can react more with more content. We can even do a trip strategy video after the FA Cup, and if we get any kind of early announcements. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.